If you have dyslipidemia, in other words, your triglycerides are high, your LDL cholesterol is high, there's a good chance you have some sort of metabolic impairment there, and it could be prediabetes or diabetes.
Dr. Brian Mowll is the founder and medical director of Sweet Life Diabetes Health Centers and serves clients worldwide as the diabetes coach. For over 20 years, Dr. Mowll has been helping people around the world to optimize their health and metabolism, control blood sugar, and reverse type 2 diabetes using a natural, personalized lifestyle approach. In addition, he is the host of the #1 rated Mastering Blood Sugar podcast and author of the #1 international best-selling book, The Pro-Fast Diet, Burn Fat and Reserves Type 2 Diabetes in Just 6 Weeks.
It's a condition that is just as devastating if it's not treated properly. So it can cause blindness, kidney failure in adults, causes dementia, sexual dysfunction, cardiovascular disease, stroke, heart attack. It is a big problem. Just make sure your blood sugar is in good range because...
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better. Well, actually, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms. Welcome to the next talk of the Uncovering the Secrets of Longevity, Live Beyond the Norms Health Summit. Let's talk diabetes. In one study, let's talk diabetes. In one study, every decade of earlier diagnosis of diabetes was associated with the 3 to 4 years of lower life expectancy. Let me kind of reword that. If you were diagnosed in 40, you had 3 to 4 years less of a lifespan than if you were diagnosed in 50 versus if you were diagnosed in 60, same 3 to 4 years. So you want to get diagnosed earlier, and I think we're going to say you want to just not end up with diabetes. So it is important to delay the onset of diabetes. Additionally, once diagnosed with diabetes, proper management can significantly extend your life. We're going to learn about this and much more with our next expert. Dr. Brian Mowll is the founder and medical director of Sweet Life Diabetes Health Centers and serves clients worldwide as the diabetes coach. For over 20 years, Dr. Mowll has been helping people around the world to optimize their health and metabolism, control blood sugar, and reverse type 2 diabetes using a natural, personalized lifestyle approach. In addition, he is the host of the #1 rated Mastering Blood Sugar podcast and author of the #1 international best-selling book, The Pro-Fast Diet, Burn Fat and Reserves Type 2 Diabetes in Just 6 Weeks. Welcome to your talk, Dr. Mowll.
Thanks, Chris, so much. Happy to be here. And, longevity is such an important topic. And I think one of the best ways to live a long life is to not die of something that kills most people. And diabetes is one of those things. And not only is it one of those things, but it's associated with, I think it's 6 or 7 of the top 10 of those things, which we can talk about today. So just avoiding all of this is a great way to live longer. And then we can also talk about how to live well also, because if we're going to live long, we want to have a good quality of life as well.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your career, right? So the title, the moniker, the diabetes coach, coach, like what led you to this? Like, what was the path that got you to this point?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there's a lot to that whole idea because diabetes care, as it's called, medical care, conventional care for the most part, is inside of a medical system that's really not designed for diabetes. It's designed for crisis intervention for the most part. So, if you were to stand in a primary care medical office for an entire day and watch 20 or 30 or more patients come in and out, you'd find out that, doctors are seeing people with coughs and ear infections and sprained ankles and strange rashes on their arm and all kinds of stuff. And then, when the person with high blood sugar comes in, they have the same 8, 10, 12 minutes to spend with them trying to find a solution for something that took decades to develop and can't be cured in a visit. So the mainstream or conventional medical system just doesn't fit with diabetes or most cardiometabolic diseases, things like you know heart disease, chronic inflammation, Alzheimer's disease, and a lot of problems that sort of are in that same area of healthcare and medicine. So what we, I noticed this very early on in my practice, and I developed sort of this passion for helping people with diabetes early on from a more of a natural dietary and lifestyle perspective, but realized that you can't do that much in an office visit. So we totally revamped the way diabetes care is delivered and use more of a coaching model, which is a very small amount of clients that you're working with very closely for a period of time to completely overhaul their diet and lifestyle so that they really develop new habits, new routines, break through cravings, and learn to eat and take care of themselves in a brand new way. And that can make a big difference in something like type 2 diabetes.
Excellent. So what are the key causes and indications of diabetes?
Yeah, so, there's two main types of diabetes, and they're very different. Sometimes I wish they didn't share the same last name. So, there's type 1 and type 2. And
By the way,
type
my
1,
brother and I are very different, and we share the same last name.
exactly. Yeah, that's not uncommon. So type 1 is the autoimmune version of diabetes. It used to be called juvenile onset diabetes because it typically affects kids, sometimes very early in life, but usually 5, 6, 7 years old, all the way up into late teen years. And typically what happens in type 1 is there's some sort of trigger. It could be a dietary trigger, it could be an infectious trigger. Something triggers the immune system, which is sort of pre-programmed to attack the pancreas and destroys it. The pancreas makes a hormone called insulin, which allows us to control and regulate our blood sugar. So when the pancreas can't do that anymore, we don't make that hormone anymore, and the blood sugar goes up really high. Something that's interesting about type 1, before I move on to type 2, is a lot of people think about diabetes and obesity together. They think, okay, you have to be fat to be diabetic, which is absolutely not true, even in type 2 diabetes. But in type 1, because they don't make insulin, usually it's diagnosed when children are withering away. Because they're losing weight very quickly. They're going to the bathroom all the time. They're very thirsty because basically they can't store energy. And that's insulin's main job, is to store energy. So when you don't have it, you don't store energy. And insulin's also sort of a brake on the liberation of energy from the liver and from muscles and other areas. So when you don't have insulin to stop the release of energy, now you've got muscles getting broken down and metabolized. The liver is just dumping glucose into the bloodstream. The body can't store anything. So the body withers away to nothing almost. So the early cases of diabetes that we see in the literature from late 1800s, early 1900s were mostly type 1, and they were mostly very skinny, skeletal, people who had diabetes. And then insulin, was discovered or identified, and then they found a way to create it, and then now all those people's lives are saved, thank God, and they end up on insulin for their whole life, but can live a very good quality of life with insulin. Type 2 diabetes, the other brother or sister, is very, very different. That's a lifestyle-based condition. There are genetics involved, but it's associated with a resistance to that same hormone, insulin. So we make it, but our cells don't respond to it. So the liver doesn't respond to it effectively. The muscles don't respond to it effectively. The fat cells don't respond to it effectively. So what happens is we get too much glucose in the bloodstream, and we actually end up many times gaining weight, but not always. There's different genetic factors involved with that. And that is a very slowly progressing condition. So you may see your blood sugar trickle up for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years before you move into full-blown type 2 diabetes. It's a condition that is just as devastating if it's not treated properly. So it can cause blindness. In fact, it's the leading cause of adult blindness, the leading cause of kidney failure in adults. It's the leading cause of lower limb amputation that's not related to a trauma in adults. It causes dementia, sexual dysfunction, cardiovascular disease, stroke, heart attack. So it is a big problem. Like I said, linked to 6 or 7 of the top 10 killers in our country. But it's something that can be stopped and reversed and turned around if you do the right thing.
So it's interesting that the kind of the first patients for diabetes, and this is type 1 diabetes, were the opposite of what we tend to picture of a diabetic person, right? We tend to picture somebody who's overweight. And in fact, it was skinny, scrawny kids, right, who were struggling because they couldn't store energy. That were the first indications. When should, like, we often do blood tests now, and maybe that's where it's picked up. But is there any kind of situation where you would say, hey, you need to go check and see if you have diabetes? Maybe just some people, don't like needles, don't get blood work done regularly.
Right, right. Yeah, people are getting tested more and more often. And since you brought it up, the chief blood tests that are typically done are going to be glucose, which is part of a metabolic panel. And then there's a test called hemoglobin A1C, which is more and more done routinely, especially as people start to age. There's also just a standard lipid panel, which a lot of people don't think of when they think of diabetes. But if you have dyslipidemia, in other words, your triglycerides are high, your LDL cholesterol is high, for example, there's a good chance you have some sort of metabolic impairment there, and it could be prediabetes or diabetes. So that's another clue. So we look at, those are the basics that are often done. There's inflammatory tests. You can actually test insulin levels. There's a wide range of other tests that we do with our clients, but those are almost always done anyway. So you can look at those, and you want to err on the side of trying to get those numbers optimal rather than just sort of acceptable. So, in other words, with glucose here in the U.S., typically that number is going to be like under 100 is acceptable, but really we want it more under 90, like in the 80s is more optimal. Once it gets over 100, it's considered pre-diabetes, and then over 126 is considered type 2 diabetes. So, you've got this sort of no man's land between 100 and 126 where doctors will just say, well, let's keep an eye on it. But they're keeping an eye on a problem without giving much direction on how to fix that problem until it becomes a major, major problem. So better to address it earlier. As far as, if you don't have the blood test, what to look for, certainly abdominal weight gain is a major factor that is tied very closely with insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. By the way, you don't have to be overweight. You don't have to have an elevated BMI. If you're, like you used to be, maybe you had a six pack or you were real lean, but now you've got sort of a bulge around the midsection. I've even seen people with six packs who have kind of a bulge around the midsection, if you can picture that. So there are different phenotypes, different displays. People show up in different ways, different body types. And so if you notice, I used to have a real flat belly, and now I sort of have a little bit of a bulge, especially if it's not the jiggly fat, but it's more of a pushed out. That's a sign that there could be some fat in the organs or around the organs, And that is really the main driver of insulin resistance, which becomes type 2 diabetes. So that's a clue. There is a measurement that you can do on yourself too. It's called waist to height ratio, where you measure your waist around your belly button and you compare it to your height, and it should be less than half. So, for example, if your height is 60 inches, your belly should be less than 30 inches. So, and actually should be even lower than that. Like we use more like 0.47, 0.46, something like that, but should definitely be less than half. So you can actually measure that, or you can just, eyeball it. If you notice your body is changing over time, because a lot of this happens as we get older. I used to be real skinny around the midsection, or women will say, I used to store fat more on my legs and my chest, and now I seem to have this belly, especially post-menopause. That's a sign that there's likely a problem happening with the blood sugar and insulin signaling, so insulin resistance and prediabetes, if not type 2 diabetes. Sugar cravings, feeling like you get hangry if you don't eat, like if you miss a meal, you just can't focus, you can't pay attention, you get irritable. That's a sign of unstable blood sugar. And I mentioned sugar cravings. So if you feel like, boy, if I don't eat by 10 o'clock in the morning, I get ravenously hungry, or I have, a sandwich for lunch and I want something sweet afterwards. Those are signs of insulin resistance that are sort of, yellow flags or maybe even red flags that you probably want to follow up on.
Excellent. So the way you were describing kind of the belly fat is that, people talk about a spare tire, but you mentioned somebody might have a six pack. So you're talking more about internal, right? So it pushes the gut
Yeah,
out.
visceral fat. Yeah,
Okay.
so the spare tire is typically like flank fat, and we see that with guys, women too. That's more subcutaneous fat typically, where they'll get it on like back fat or around the sides, and that might not be all that attractive to some people, but it's not really dangerous fat. The dangerous fat is the fat that's kind of in and around the organs, and one of the reasons it's dangerous is because when you release fatty acids from that fat, it goes right into the liver, and it's carried. And if the liver, again, if you're young and lean and super active and fit, the liver is going to be able to burn up that fat or send it where it needs to go. But once a problem starts to develop and the liver starts to get kind of congested, if you want to think about it that way, when the liver has that just stream of fat coming into it, it has a hard time processing it. So it builds up in the liver, and then that kind of starts the process of a fatty liver, which can either lead to or worsen diabetes and cause a host of other issues.
So you mentioned that people don't have to be overweight, right? So that's one of the kind of typical things. You mentioned the litany of things that can cascade negatively out of diabetes. Is there anything else that the layperson might find surprising about diabetes? Like wow, it does this, or it has this impact, or is there anything else that the layperson typically doesn't know about diabetes?
I think blood sugar fluctuations are something to pay attention to, and not everybody's going to pay attention this closely, but there's a concept called area under the curve, and this gets a little geeky, but if you can imagine a blood sugar curve, so imagine you're checking your blood sugar all the time, and you eat a meal, and it starts at a certain level, goes up, and then eventually comes back down to that level that it was before you ate. That creates a curve, or what's called a glycemic curve, and the area underneath that curve is largely associated with diabetes complications and problems. So the higher blood sugar goes and the longer it's up, the greater the likelihood of a problem. And that's associated also with this test I mentioned called hemoglobin A1C. So a normal hemoglobin A1C is a percentage. It's typically around 5%. And what that what that actually is measuring is the amount of uh, basically receptor sites on a part of the red blood cell that have sugar attached to them. So you can think of it as a sugar coated red blood cell. And that's a problem because the more sugar coated a red blood cell is, the worse it is at carrying oxygen and being able to do what it's supposed to do. It gets kind of heavy, it gets sticky, it gets bogged down. And so things like wound healing don't happen very well when you are not carrying oxygen to the feet and the legs. The eyes develop problems, the kidneys develop problems. So when that percentage goes from 5% to 6%, that hemoglobin A1C test, the amount of those receptors that are sugar coated, when that goes from 5 to 6%, there's about an 18 to 20% increased risk for a problem. And the list of problems is large. I mentioned them earlier. When it goes from 6% to 7%, you have another 18 to 20% increased likelihood of a problem. When it goes from 7 to 8, another 18 to 20%. So, the average person who comes in to see me with type 2 diabetes or uncontrolled type 1 for that matter is going to have an A1C of 8 to 10. So that's already 3-4 points above what it's supposed to be. So you're getting close already to almost 100% likelihood that you're going to have a stroke, have a heart attack, lose your vision, have kidney failure, lose a foot or a toe. So it's not good. And that area under the curve is largely what determines that. So how can we change that, or it can be measured in different ways. There's CGMs that are available right now, continuous glucose monitors. Most people are probably not going to wear one of those unless they already have a blood sugar problem, unless you're just really into evaluating your health. But those are available, and there are ways to get them if you wanted to use one. I recommend it for people. You can wear it for 2 weeks or a month, and it'll give you a lot of data, especially if you have a family history of diabetes, or you've had hypoglycemia where your blood sugar drops too low and you get really irritable or hangry, or you had gestational diabetes as a woman, that's diabetes of pregnancy, or you're overweight, or if you notice that you have that belly bulge that we talked about. Those are all good reasons to maybe pay a little bit more attention to your blood sugar, and wearing a CGM can show you that curve throughout the entire day. So how high your blood sugar goes and how long it stays high are both really important factors to pay attention to. I'll just give you one quick example of that. Someone might eat an apple, for example, and their blood sugar may spike up, say 40 points, but it might come right back down in 15 minutes. So yeah, there is a small area under that curve, and it did go kind of high, maybe not ideal, but not really that big of a deal. Somebody else might eat a slice of pizza, and maybe their blood sugar goes up 40 points, but it stays high for 4 hours. That's a much bigger deal because we've got all that time there where the blood sugar is elevated, causing damage. So the CGM lets you see that. There's other ways to do it, but I think just paying attention to that is something important that a lot of people maybe don't think about.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. We'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast. When I've read about like CGMs, a couple of notes have come up that I thought were interesting. Certainly haven't delved into it a lot, but one was that somebody had a CGM on each arm and it was vastly different. And that's interesting, right? I'm a scientist. I'm trying to figure out like, well, how do we get these right? I think the challenge, and I just learned this probably 2 weekends ago, my brother has diabetes and has a CGM and told me that he knew he was off. Like, I think it was saying he should be really high, it was indicating that it was not really high, but higher relative than his last meal. And so he did a pinprick and then was able to recalibrate the CGM. So, like, the fact that there's a calibration process, and maybe that doesn't exist on all of them, kind of explains why one might read one way and one might read another. The other thing that I thought was interesting is talking about people, kind of in the example you gave, but somebody might have an apple, it goes up 40 points, and somebody else might have an apple and it barely moves, right? Like, people process food differently. And I think that's maybe one reason it would be interesting if it's, within your means to get a CGM. I certainly plan on getting one at some point. You talk a lot about metabolic health, right? And they're very intertwined. Give us like the relationship between metabolic health, and I know you've touched on this a little bit, and diabetes, and why you end up talking about metabolic health so much.
Yeah, so diabetes type 2 in particular is sort of the pinnacle, I think, of metabolic dysfunction. So metabolic health is a broad topic and it involves a lot of things, but generally we're talking about energy metabolism here when we talk about metabolic health, and that is how you process fuel and turn it into cellular energy, and the consequences of doing that well or poorly. So type 2 diabetes is sort of the ultimate negative consequence of poor, uh, you know, energetic metabolic health, where the body is not processing energy properly, the hormonal signals aren't working, and essentially you get a buildup of too much energy in the system. You can think of it kind of like an energy toxicity, and that starts wreaking havoc on the body. So the two main energy substrates that we think about are glucose and fatty acids, which enter the mitochondria, get burned, turned into ATP. And those are both involved with diabetes. So you get this overaccumulation of glucose. So the liver is full, the muscles are full. A lot of people, unfortunately, with diabetes aren't burning the glucose in their muscles or their liver because they're eating all the time and not exercising very much. So you get this excess, and then there's an excess in the blood as well, hence high blood sugar. And fat is the same. So we get an excess of fat in our fat cells. We get an excess of fat in the liver. We get excess fat in the blood, which is measured as triglycerides and ultimately drives up our LDL particle numbers and LDL cholesterol, and is associated with all sorts of negative health outcomes. So basically, it's a backup of too much energy in the system because it's not being used properly. A lot of times, people with type 2 diabetes have low energy. I mean, they have all this energy available, but they don't feel like they have energy, if that makes sense. And yeah, some of that could be related to sleep or other things, but you would think with all this energy to burn, they would have plenty of ATP and be able to, just be firing it all cylinders and feeling good. But and I know it's more complex than that, but if you just think about it in simple terms, there's some sort of problem in the system. And so that's one side of it, but there's a lot that happens before you get to that point. And metabolic health to me is really important when it comes to, like, we're talking about longevity here, because poor metabolic health is associated with so many negative health outcomes. These are the things, like I said earlier, that end up killing us. So if we want to live a long time and we want to live well, then obviously we want to protect ourselves from chronic disease, and we want to avoid the major killers that wipe out most Americans, or really most people in the world, in at least the industrialized countries. So if you improve your metabolic health, and again, this is going to be very simplified, but if we move the body and keep our body composition in the right range, so we have less fat mass and more muscle mass, and we're active and fit and strong, and we eat a good diet, we reduce inflammation, we have blood sugar in the normal range and lipids in the normal range, and we have metabolic flexibility, which means we have plenty of energy turnover. We have room in the muscles to store glucose. We have room in the fat cells to store fat, and there's a free flow of energy in and out of storage, and we're burning it effectively. Then a lot of the problems that come from poor metabolic health just don't exist. So, uh, again, things like Alzheimer's disease, which is sometimes called type 3 diabetes, insulin resistance or diabetes of the brain, cardiovascular disease, which is again linked to whether you want to say high LDL particle numbers or chronic inflammation or endothelial dysfunction or whatever you want to blame it on. All of those are metabolic issues. Stroke, much the same way. Blood clotting is less when you have better metabolic health. Blood sugar obviously plays a big role in many of these conditions. So by improving metabolic health, staying lean, strong, healthy, fit, low fat mass, high lean muscle mass, eating a good healthy diet, clean diet, you're going to avoid a lot of these killers and have really good quality of life.
So you just said lean, strong, healthy, fit. I have to think that a number of people who come to you, a number of people, especially if we think about our stereotype of what it is to look like if you have diabetes, lean, strong, healthy, and fit may not even be on their radar, right? It may not. I mean, for two levels, it may not be a goal, right? And that may be fine for where they're at prior to getting their diagnosis, or it just may seem that they can't reach it. What are the levels that you tend to pull on and manipulate, or suggest get pulled on and manipulated to make metabolic health improvements?
Well, I think it's important to have a picture in your mind of sort of what the picture of no diabetes is, and because a lot of people don't, they don't have that end goal in mind for them. And it doesn't mean you have to get all the way there, because incremental improvements can have profound health implications. So if you bring your A1C, I talked about that a lot. If you bring your A1C down from 7.5% to 6%, still not perfect, but again, you've just made a massive change in your health, the likelihood that you're going to be healthy and avoid major diseases. If you lose 10% of your fat mass, 10% of your body weight in fat mass, assuming you're overweight, that'll have huge implications on metabolic health. And studies have shown that just losing even 8 to 10%, you can oftentimes reverse type 2 diabetes. If you're pre-diabetic, you can avoid becoming diabetic. Not always, but many cases, you can improve a lot of health outcomes that I just talked about. So these are incremental changes, but I still think it's important to have a picture of what does somebody look like who is sort of the opposite of a type 2 diabetic. And it kind of is that lean, strong body type. So it's someone who has, probably very low body fat percentage, but more importantly, very low amount of visceral fat. So, a lean midsection, and does have some muscle. You don't have to become a massive bodybuilder, but you need some muscle on your frame, because muscle is the biggest glucose sink. It burns the most glucose in your body. The brain burns the most by weight, but you've got a lot more muscle than brain, and your muscles burn the most in the body. It's something like 70 to 80% of the glucose that gets burned in your body gets burned by the muscle. So the more muscle you have, the faster your metabolic rate's going to be. The higher your resting metabolic rate, the more energy you're going to burn every day without doing anything. And the more room you have to store glucose, which is really helpful. So we do want to be more muscular. For somebody, I mean, my average client patient is, 50, 60, 70-year-old, uh, woman or man. We have more women than men come in. And yeah, they're not bodybuilders. They don't look strong and lean and fit necessarily. Although we do have some who have been active most of their life and still developed a problem because of that central belly fat. So um, so going from that to Arnold Schwarzenegger or something like that is not is not probably ever going to happen, nor would they want it to happen. And being, like you said, Chris, lean, strong, fit, and active, maybe that's not even a goal of theirs, but it should be a goal to move closer to that. And that's really the key: is get moving, do some sort of resistance training, clean up the diet so that you are eating a good quality, nutrient dense diet, and try to lean out, especially in the midsection, because that can make a huge difference.
So if you have the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, it may not be on your radar to be lean, strong, fit, and active, but it should be on your radar to be leaner, stronger, fitter, and more active than you are today. And that's incremental. That's not, like you said, it's not Arnold Schwarzenegger off in the distance. I think back to when my mom was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and she actually managed it, I think, for the first 9 months, probably up to 18 months, with just by eating healthier and going on walks. Like, she just got more activity and then a better diet, and then that just waned off. And it just makes me think about how much of what you do is relating to the coaching aspect, right? Because it's clearly a goal. Ostensibly it's a goal in the case of my mother and most of your clients and most of the people who have type 2 diabetes, to get better, and then it seems not to happen. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's a lifestyle change. It's habit creation, and to create new habits, you've got to get rid of old habits, and that's not easy. So it is a process. It takes time, and it takes consistent effort over time. Coaching helps a lot because you're accountable to something outside of yourself, and there's things that we can help shortcut for people that can maybe help them to stay the course long enough to create new habits. The first month or two of a change, a lot of times people will use willpower. They'll get motivated by a bad lab report or some sort of health crisis, or whatever it is that they'll take that external motivation and say, I need to make a change. Maybe they hit a certain number on the scale or look in the mirror one day and don't like what they see, or whatever it happens to be. But people will get motivated, and that motivation will last for maybe a month or 2 or 3 at the most, I've found. And even if they're getting results, it just starts to tail off, like you said, Chris. I mean, it's only going to last so long. So we can't depend on willpower and external motivation to make lasting change. It has to come from within, and there has to be new behavior put into place. And that takes a while to retrain. I talk about the big leap with my clients where, you're going to fight it for a while. How long am I going to have to avoid cookies? How long am I ever going to be able to have a sandwich with bread again? And, first of all, one thing
Absolutely
we always
not.
share.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. One thing we always share is, look, you can eat whatever you want at any time. You're in charge of your diet. So you can go out and have a slice of pizza or a slice of cake today, but it is going to have negative consequences on your health. So will you ever be able to do that without having negative consequences on your health? Maybe, but if you do get to that point, you're probably not going to want to do it anyway, because there will come a time when you make a shift. And, we can liken that to giving up cigarette smoking, or stop. Most of us drank soda at one time in our life, and maybe don't drink soda anymore. So why don't you drink soda anymore? If you went to a wedding and the server came around and said, would you like a soda? And everybody else was drinking soda at the table and you don't drink it, you're probably not going to drink it because you don't want it. So you made that shift with that particular food. You can make that shift with other foods. It just takes time and you've got to lean into it. And it's a behavior, it's a habit that has to change and shift. So, we look for a lot of people who, if you're pre-diabetic, you can probably get to a point where you can have some treats and things like that again once you lose the weight and get yourself back fit and active and healthy, like we talked about. If you're in that full-blown type 2 diabetes range, we have an expression that diabetes leaves scars, and it's very difficult to ever get to the point again where you can eat a cookie without your blood sugar going up. So at that point, it's probably going to have to be a long-term change in diet that's going to be permanent. So if you want to have normal blood sugar, so that's a process of sort of grieving those foods, getting to a point where you find other foods that you enjoy or other things in life that you enjoy that you can go out and maybe it's a conversation or a new hobby or a walk with a friend or whatever. We don't have to depend on food for our entertainment and our pleasure and joy. So there's some of that is coaching, some of it is behavior change, some of it is perspective. And I try to be real with people, based on where you are, here's, what we can expect. But what's the alternative, right? I mean, it's do this, or you either wind up on 3 or 4 different drugs for the rest of your life, or you wind up with a major life issue and you don't have that long, healthy, vibrant life. So I think the change is worth it. Doesn't make it easy, but there are tips and strategies and things that we do with people and people can do on their own that can create those new behaviors, create those new habits, help them break through that wantingness of whatever that particular stimuli is and find other things that can bring that joy and pleasure and peace and satisfaction in their life.
I think the perfect question to follow up that is, what about artificial sweeteners, right? If you're looking for replacements or alternatives, where do those sit with how you view it?
Yeah. So it's a good question. And I think my perspective's changed a little bit on artificial sweeteners over the years. I don't think they're the worst things in the world. I would not put them into sort of a healthy whole food diet category. So, if you're one who says, hey, I want to eat really clean, I want to, eat the best quality food that I possibly can, then I would avoid artificial sweeteners because they're not natural. There are some studies that show they can disrupt gut microbiome. They might trigger food cravings in some people. So probably not ideal. But again, if it's, going to somehow improve the quality of your life to have, a treat with an artificial sweetener in it, and it's that or the sugar version, then I'd much rather see you do the artificial sweetener. If you're someone who just, for whatever reason, you've tried and you just cannot give up soda and it's like the last thing, you eat a great diet and you just have to have that soda or two every day. Yeah, I'd rather see you do a diet soda than a regular soda. The one thing I say about artificial sweeteners, if you are going to use them in a non-caloric setting. In other words, don't mix artificial sweeteners with high calorie foods because that's where they tend to lead to overeating. So if you're going to have, like, for example, a diet soda, have a diet soda and nothing else. Chew on some chewing gum with artificial sweeteners in it if that's something you like to do. If you want to have some sugar-free Jell-O, have the sugar-free Jell-O with nothing else. And you should be fine. You're not going to see an elevation in blood sugar. It's not going to cause any major issues that I'm aware of. Some people do react negatively to them. They can cause headaches and other issues in some people. They might disrupt the gut. So again, not a perfect food, but that is not going to probably have negative metabolic health consequences. However, if we take an artificial sweetener and make cookies out of it with almond butter and coconut flour or other things like that. And then we think, okay, this doesn't have sugar in it, so I'm going to eat these cookies. That can become a problem because oftentimes it'll lead to 2 cookies, 3 cookies, 4 cookies, and now all of a sudden you've eaten, 1,200, 1,500 calories of cookies. And again, that puts us in that energy toxicity range, which leads to problems.
I can just share with my story with Diet Cokes is I was getting a deep tissue massage from my chiropractor on my calves because they would just knot up. And so one day she was like, "Well, how much water do you drink?" And I asked her, "Well, how much does a Diet Coke count?" And she said -1. And I said, "Then I drink -6 waters a day because that's where I was at the time, and now I don't drink them." Right? Like
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
think of it in terms of negative water, that might be another reason to push that off. But I like the advice of keep that keep that adjustment on its own, right? I think that makes a lot of sense. All right,
Yeah, and
so
again, better to eliminate them if possible.
yes, yeah, and I've read, the impact on your gut biome is just significantly higher than you realize, and so that doesn't even like you're just thinking, okay, it's sweetish, right? And it's a replacement for sugar, but it has other impacts, and be aware of those.
Right. And I would even, the advice I gave about in a non caloric setting, I would even apply that to things like stevia and monk fruit and erythritol and allulose, which are considered sort of safer, non nutritive sweeteners. But again, they can make you crave more food. And if you tie that to energy, like a high fat or typically it's going to be a higher fat type food, like think about a fat bomb sweetened with some allulose or something like that. That can be disastrous because you can end up getting really hungry and eating like 5 or 6 of those, which just can again lead to that huge energy backup and cause all kinds of problems.
Do you have a favored like monk fruit, allulose? Like, do you have a favored?
Yeah, no, I like the 4 that I mentioned: stevia, allulose, monk fruit, sometimes called lohan, and erythritol, which is a sugar alcohol, but it's one that doesn't seem to irritate the gut, and it's non-caloric. Those seem to be fine as far as blood sugar, and I haven't seen any good studies on them causing problems with the gut or having many side effects like headaches or nervous system issues or things like that we see with aspartame and sucralose. So those are safer. Again, I would try to use them in a way. I would minimize their use anyway. And I would try to use them in a way where it doesn't cause you to overeat high energy or high caloric foods.
Makes perfect sense. All right, so we have kind of some wrap up questions. Do you have a target age that you want to live to?
Well, fortunately, I have good genes. So, my grandfather lived to, I think, 96. And I had a grandmother who smoked 2 packs a day and was an alcoholic, and she lived to late 80s. So, I think my goal is probably in the 90s as far as age, at least. But more importantly than that would be quality of life, and I'm sure everybody says this, but that's very true for me. I mean, of course I have kids, and I'm sure one day we'll have grandkids, and I'm going to want to see them have lives of their own, and hopefully be traveling and enjoying life when I'm older. So to me it's about quality. I remember I went to a live Dr. Oz lecture one time, and I didn't get that much out of it. But one thing he said really stuck with me, which is the major killer is not heart disease or cancer, all these other things, it's frailty. And what he was really talking about there is as we age, we lose our strength, we lose our resolve. And yes, older people fall and break hips, and that's, a major killer. But it's more than that. It's the ability to fight off infections. It's the ability to, um, have a strong immune system to hold back cancer, to have good metabolic health. And so to me, it's more about being strong and vibrant and vital as I age. And nothing's guaranteed in life, but if we can do everything we can to protect our metabolic health and stay vital and strong, I think that's going to give us a good chance for high quality of life.
All right. What are the 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets? Let's call them shortcuts, because everybody likes shortcuts to longevity and a long health span that you would share.
Well, so a couple of things. One is, I would say, because of what we're talking about here, check your blood sugar. I think everybody needs to be checking their blood sugar. You don't know what it is if you don't check it. And so, even if you just get a over-the-counter glucometer for $20 and check your blood sugar once in a while, before a meal, after a meal, first thing in the morning, and just make sure your blood sugar is, in good range, because again, when you lose your metabolic health, you're setting yourself up for disastrous consequences. So that's something you can do proactively as sort of a biomarker. As far as healthy habits to do, there's a number of them. One of the things I love to do is fasting, and I'm sure people have talked about fasting before. Not long fasts, but regular periods of short fasts. So, like a 1-day fast, something like a 1-day fast once a week, or maybe a 1.5-day fast once a week or every other week. If you're trying to recover metabolic health, that's a strategy we use, where we do alternate day fasting, not with everybody, but with a lot of our clients. And so that's like 2 or 3 1-day fasts a week. And that can be really profound. But I think fasting, it gives the body a chance to reset, increases that autophagy process where we recycle cells, drops growth signals like mTOR and IGF-1, which allows the body to kind of reset. You don't want to do that all the time, but periodic fasting can be really helpful to just keep the body in a state of repair and renewal.
All right, Dr. Mowll, how can people contact you?
Yeah, so I have a podcast, which is Mastering Blood Sugar, so they can go check that out on wherever they find their podcasts if they like information, which I'm sure they do if they're on this. Also, our website, drmowll.com. It's just drmowll.com. There's a freebie on there called the Blood Sugar Manifesto that they can grab. Just put your email in, we'll send it to you. And it's like a 30 or 40 page ebook that has all kinds of helpful tips and strategies on optimizing your blood sugar and metabolic health.
Excellent. And what in the near future are you excited about?
Well, let's see. That's a good question. I think that technology is really helping us to monitor health in such a way that we can make more proactive changes. So something like a CGM we talked about earlier, there's a lot of different blood tests and other functional tests that we can get, which can tell us so much about our health. One thing I love is whole body MRI. So there are some whole body MRI centers around the country where they can, have early detection for all sorts of problems. You can actually measure the amount of fat in your viscera, in your liver, in your pancreas and organs, which can help you to turn things around quickly. So I think that's one thing I'm excited about, is to see technology become more affordable, more accessible for people, so we can use that to improve our health outcomes.
Yeah, there's no doubt technology is going to be making massive shifts in all spaces, including health. Dr. Mowll, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.